An old woman is asked to solve a math problem. Turns out she's a retired math genius. Martha Jenkins clutched her worn leather purse as she approached the federal courthouse steps. The October wind whipped through downtown Washington. Dar, Sia, making her gray hair dance wildly. She had dressed in her Sunday best, a modest blue dress she'd owned for 15 years now. The security guard at the entrance barely glanced up from his smartphone as she approached. "Ma'am, you can't come in here dressed like that," he said, eyeing her faded wool coat. Martha's weathered hands trembled slightly as she tried to explain she was meeting someone. "I don't care who you're meeting. This is a federal building, not a homeless shelter." The morning had started with such hope as Martha carefully selected her outfit at home. She'd pressed the blue dress with the old iron Harold bought her 30 years ago. Her granddaughter had helped her with her hair last week, styling it simply but nicely. Martha had even polished her only pair of dress shoes until they gleamed despite age. The bus ride downtown had been crowded, but she'd given her seat to a pregnant woman. Now all that careful preparation felt worthless under the guard's dismissive gaze. She clutched her purse tighter, feeling the weight of his judgment crushing her spirit. The words stung more than the cold wind cutting through her thin coat and old dress. Martha had walked 12 blocks from the bus stop, her arthritis protesting each step. She watched younger people in expensive suits breeze past her into the building easily. "Please, young man, I just need 5 minutes inside. My husband asked me to meet him." The guard laughed dismissively, his hand moving toward his radio to call for backup. "Lady, if your husband worked here, you wouldn't be taking the bus." He sneered coldly. Other visitors began to stare, making Martha's cheeks burn with shame and frustration. A young lawyer paused to watch, her designer heels clicking as she shifted uncomfortably. An older gentleman in a tailored suit averted his eyes and hurried past the scene. 2 interns whispered to each other, one pulling out her phone to record the encounter. Martha noticed a mother quickly ushering her children away from the growing commotion. The security guard puffed out his chest, emboldened by his audience of silent watchers. "Step aside, ma'am. You're blocking the entrance for people who have real business here." Each word felt like another stone added to the weight Martha carried on her shoulders. She remembered when she and Harold first met at a civil rights march in Alabama in 1965. They'd both been young idealists then, fighting for justice with fire in their hearts. Harold had just graduated from law school, and she was teaching at a segregated school. Through decades of struggle, they'd built their life on principles of equality and dignity. Now here she stood, deemed unworthy to enter a building dedicated to justice itself. The security guard's radio crackled as he called for someone to remove the vagrant. Martha straightened her shoulders, refusing to let them see how deeply they'd wounded her. Inside the courthouse, Harold Jenkins adjusted his black robes in his chambers carefully. The other Supreme Court justices had already gathered for their morning conference meeting. He glanced at his watch, wondering why Martha hadn't arrived yet for their lunch date. They'd maintained this tradition for 40 years, even after his appointment to the court. His clerk knocked softly on the door. "Justice Jenkins, there's a disturbance outside." Harold frowned, walking to his window that overlooked the courthouse's main entrance. What he saw below made his blood run cold, and his fists clench in quiet fury. Harold recognized Martha's blue dress immediately, the one she wore to every special occasion. He watched the security guards surrounding her, their postures aggressive and dismissive. Without a word to his clerk, he strode from his chambers, his robes billowing behind him. The marble halls echoed with his footsteps as court staff quickly moved out of his way. Harold Jenkins was known for his calm demeanor, but now his face showed controlled rage. He burst through the main entrance doors just as a guard reached for Martha's arm roughly. "Take your hands off my wife," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of authority. The security guard froze, his face draining of color as he recognized Justice Jenkins. The small crowd that had gathered fell silent, processing what they were witnessing. Harold moved to Martha's side, gently taking her trembling hand in his weathered one. "Are you all right, my love?" he asked softly, his eyes never leaving the guard's face. Martha nodded, tears threatening to spill from her proud brown eyes as she stood tall. The guard stammered. "Justice Jenkins, I didn't know she was... I'm so sorry, sir. You're sorry because she's my wife, not because you treated a human being like trash." Harold's words cut through the morning air like a blade through silk, sharp and precise. He looked at each face in the crowd, seeing shame beginning to replace their curiosity. "This woman has more dignity in her little finger than you've shown in your actions." The guard's supervisor had arrived. His face flushed as he absorbed the situation quickly. "Justice Jenkins, please accept our deepest apologies. This will never happen again." Harold raised his hand for silence. "Your apologies mean nothing if your policies don't change." He wrapped his arm protectively around Martha, feeling her lean into his familiar warmth. Martha finally spoke, her voice steady despite the tears now flowing down her cheeks. "I told him I was meeting my husband. He said I looked like I belonged in a shelter." Her words made several onlookers gasp, finally understanding the gravity of what occurred. Harold's jaw tightened. "My wife has stood by me through law school on a teacher's salary. She's raised our children while I worked 100-hour weeks, building my career path. She's sacrificed more than anyone in that building knows. And you dare judge her worth?" The guard couldn't meet his eyes, staring instead at the cold concrete beneath his feet. Harold turned to address the growing crowd, his voice carrying the wisdom of his years. "Every day, we make judgments based on appearance, on clothes, on assumptions we carry. This courthouse stands as a symbol of justice, yet we deny entry based on worn fabric." A young law student in the crowd began recording, sensing the historic weight of the moment. "Justice isn't just what happens inside these walls. It begins at the very entrance." Martha squeezed his hand, recognizing the teacher in him emerging as he spoke truth. The security supervisor shifted uncomfortably, knowing this incident would have consequences. "New policies will be drafted." Harold continued, his tone brooking no argument or delay. "Every person seeking entry will be treated with the dignity our Constitution demands." He looked directly at the guard who had humiliated Martha. "You'll lead that training." The guard's eyes widened in surprise, expecting termination rather than responsibility. "You'll share this story, this moment when you learned that justice wears many faces." Martha touched Harold's arm gently. "Perhaps he simply needs education, not punishment." Her grace in that moment struck everyone present more powerfully than any reprimand could. The crowd began to disperse, many stopping to apologize to Martha as they passed by. A young woman pressed a fresh cup of coffee into Martha's hands with a gentle smile. An elderly man tipped his hat to her, whispering, "You've taught us all something today." Harold kept his arm around Martha as they finally entered the courthouse together. The same halls that had seemed so imposing now felt different, more welcoming somehow. Security guards nodded respectfully as they passed, word spreading quickly through building. They rode the elevator in comfortable silence, Martha still processing what had occurred. In Harold's chambers, Martha finally allowed herself to truly cry, releasing the hurt. Harold held her close, his own eyes moist as he thought of all she'd endured for him. "I'm sorry, Martha. Sorry you had to face that. Sorry I wasn't there sooner to help." She shook her head against his chest. "You were there when it mattered most, Harold." But how many others face this daily with no one to stand up for them? She wondered. Harold nodded slowly, understanding that this moment demanded more than personal comfort. "We'll make sure this changes things, not just policies, but hearts and minds too." That afternoon, Harold addressed his fellow justices during their scheduled conference. He shared Martha's experience, watching as shock registered on his colleagues. Faces, We sit here, deliberating justice, while injustice happens at our very doorstep daily. Chief Justice Morrison nodded gravely. This is unacceptable. What do you propose we do? Harold outlined a comprehensive plan for dignity training throughout the federal system. Not just here, but in every courthouse, every government building across the nation. The other justices unanimously agreed. Understanding this transcended political lines. Martha spent the afternoon in Harold's chambers, something she'd rarely done before this. His law clerks brought her tea and cookies, treating her with newfound reverence and care. She watched Harold work, seeing him draft memos with the passion of his younger days. You know, she said softly. That guard probably makes barely above minimum wage. Harold looked up from his writing, always amazed by her ability to show empathy. He's probably struggling too, taking his frustrations out on those he sees as beneath him. Then we need to address that as well, Harold replied, adding notes about fair wages. By evening, the story had spread beyond the courthouse walls to local news stations. Reporters gathered outside, hoping to speak with either Justice Jenkins or his wife. Harold and Martha decided to face them together, standing united on the courthouse steps. Today my wife was judged by her appearance rather than her character, Harold began. But she responded with grace, reminding me why I fell in love with her years ago. Martha smiled softly at him before addressing the cameras with quiet strength herself. I hope my experience today helps ensure no one else faces such humiliation here. The security guard, Marcus Thompson, watched the news coverage from his small apartment. His teenage daughter sat beside him, having heard about the incident from social media. "Dad, is that really what happened?" she asked, disappointment clear in her voice. Marcus nodded, shame washing over him as he saw himself through his daughter's eyes. "I messed up, baby. I let my own problems make me cruel to someone who didn't deserve it." His daughter was quiet for a moment. "But he's giving you a chance to make it right." Marcus realized that Justice Jenkins had offered him redemption rather than retribution. The next morning, Marcus arrived at work early, determined to begin making amends properly. He had spent the night researching unconscious bias and dignity in public service roles. When Harold and Martha arrived together, Marcus stood straighter, meeting their eyes. "Mrs. Jenkins, I want to genuinely apologize. My behavior was inexcusable yesterday." Martha studied his face, seeing real remorse there. "We all have bad days, young man. But your bad day shouldn't become someone else's nightmare," she added gently but firmly. Marcus nodded. "You're right. I'm ready to learn and help others learn from my mistake." Over the following weeks, Marcus threw himself into developing the new training program. He shared his story honestly, using his shame as a teaching tool for other guards. Martha occasionally visited, offering insights from her years as an educator and mentor. The two developed an unlikely friendship, bound by a moment that changed them both. Marcus learned about Martha's life, her sacrifices, her quiet strength through decades. She learned about his struggles, raising his daughter alone after his wife's death. Understanding bloomed where judgment once lived, replacing assumptions with empathy. The training program rolled out nationally, reaching thousands of federal employees. It became known as the Martha Protocol, emphasizing dignity for all who seek justice. Law schools began including the incident as a case study in their ethics courses. Harold received letters from people sharing how the story had changed their perspectives. But for him, the greatest victory was seeing Martha walk freely through those doors. She began volunteering at the courthouse, helping confused visitors navigate the system. Her presence became a daily reminder that justice must be accessible to everyone. Marcus's daughter wrote an essay about the incident for her college applications later. She wrote about watching her father transform from someone who judged to someone who welcomed. The essay earned her a scholarship to study law, inspired by Justice and Mrs. Jenkins. At the awards ceremony, Martha and Harold sat in the audience, beaming with pride. Marcus whispered to them, "You didn't just change policies. You changed our lives completely." Martha patted his hand. "You changed yourself. We just showed you it was possible to grow." The ceremony continued, but in that moment, 3 lives intertwined by fate felt whole. Years later, Harold announced his retirement from the Supreme Court at age 82. At his farewell ceremony, he asked Martha to stand beside him at the podium to speak. "My greatest legal victory wasn't any case I decided," he told the gathered audience. "It was the morning my wife taught us all that justice begins with simple human dignity." Martha smiled. Her blue dress, the same one, carefully preserved, catching the light. The audience rose in a standing ovation, not for the justice, but for them both united. Marcus stood among them, now head of security, his daughter beside him in judge's robes. In his final remarks, Harold reflected on their journey from Alabama to Washington, D.C. "We marched for civil rights as young people, believing in law's power to change hearts. But Martha showed me that sometimes the most profound changes come from small moments. A denied entry became an open door for thousands who might have faced the same." He took Martha's hand, raising it high. "This is what partnership in justice looks like." Cameras flashed as they stood together, 2 people who'd weathered every storm as one. Their love story had become inseparable from their justice story, intertwined forever. The courthouse lobby now featured a plaque beside the entrance, engraved with care. "True justice recognizes the dignity in every person who seeks it." The Martha Protocol. Visitors often paused to read it, some taking pictures to share the message widely. Martha liked to stand nearby sometimes, watching people discover the words with interest. When asked about it, she'd simply say, "We all deserve to be seen for who we truly are." Young law students would recognize her, asking to hear the story from her perspective. She always obliged, emphasizing forgiveness and growth over anger and resentment. The ripple effects of that October morning had spread far beyond Washington's borders. Cities across America implemented their own versions of dignity training for staff. Marcus traveled nationwide, sharing his transformation story at various courthouses. His daughter, now Judge Thompson, presided over cases with deep empathy and wisdom. She kept a photo from that retirement ceremony on her bench as a daily reminder. "Every person who enters my courtroom carries a story worth honoring," she'd say. The Martha Protocol had become more than policy. It was a philosophy of justice. Years after retirement, Harold and Martha still visited the courthouse monthly together. They'd have lunch in the cafeteria, greeting staff who'd become like extended family. New employees would seek them out, having heard the legendary story of their meeting. Martha would laugh, saying, "We're just 2 old folks who believe in treating people right." But everyone knew they were so much more, living reminders of justice's true meaning. Their presence transformed the building from a place of judgment to one of humanity. Love and justice walked hand in hand through those halls, embodied in their union. On their final walk from the courthouse together, Harold and Martha moved slowly but steadily. The same steps that had once blocked her path now seemed to welcome them both home. They passed Marcus at his post, where he stood with the dignity he now showed others. The evening sun cast long shadows as they reached the sidewalk, turning back once more. "Did you ever imagine that morning would lead to all this?" Martha asked her husband. Harold pulled her close, kissing her temple. "You've always been my greatest teacher." Hand in hand, they walked toward the sunset, leaving justice a bit more just behind them.